I see a room, firelight, a red carpet, and a man. He's well-dressed, well-spoken, a nobleman. His clothes are years ago. Blood on his clothes. He is a man who murders.
He's a strangler who's escaped from an asylum for the criminally insane. He roams the countryside at night searching for fresh victims, laughing maniacally as he kills them.
He is a cursed immortal, existing on violence, fear, dread.
It's in the trees. It's coming. The demon! It's coming!
Hypnogoria.
Have you seen me dice bag? The Grognard Files.
Hello, my name is Dirk the Dice, and this is the Grognard Files podcast, where we talk bobbins about tabletop RPGs from back in the day and today. I'm coming alive from my den here in the heart of the northwest of England. I'm completely and utterly surrounded by my stuff. This month I've been sorting out the mountain of DVDs, remember them, that I've stashed around the den. Here on my right is the great library of RPGs and my Grognard Files. On my left is the ridiculous homemade shrine to the actor Caroline Munro. I'll just give it a tap. Ah yes, the eternal champion has appeared as Laura Bellows in the Hammer classic Dracula AD 1972. This appearance is the favourite of our very special guest, Mr. Jim Moon, host of Hypnogoria podcast, the show about all things weird and wonderful. Britain's longest running horror podcast, it explores the wide and weird world of the macabre. Jim was a real inspiration when I was starting a podcast, and we've been talking for a while about doing something together about Moviedrome, the BBC Two cult film slot which ran from 1988 to 2000. We finally got together to look at the first season of films which were introduced by filmmaker and scholar Alex Cox. Our discussion is not gaming related, as Moviedrome was one of the triggers of my deep freeze beginning. I hit the age of 20 and realised that I had a lot of catching up to do to discover new worlds of cult film. Moviedrome was one of my entry points. Sure, I'd always been interested in film, but at this point I became obsessive. It wasn't easy to find cult movies that were beyond the scope of Patel's videos on Crescent Road, but indulge me as I return nostalgically to a starburst memory. I hope you enjoyed the discussion with Mr. Moon and that you will seek out Hypnogoria yourself, if it isn't already on your podcast holding pattern. I'm joined in the room of role-playing rambling by our resident rules lawyer, Judge Blythe. In keeping with the spirit of Hypnogoria, we're speed rating Vaesen, the game of Nordic horror produced by Free League in 2020. Blythe has played a lot of it, and he has much to say. I'll be back at the end with some parish notices and thanks. Until then, ramblers, let's get rambling.
Starburst memories.
This is a dream come true. My name is Dirk the Dice of the Grognard Files podcast, and I'm in the room of rambling. It's not role-playing this time. We're talking about films, and I've got with me Mr. Jim Moon from Hypnogoria. Hello there, Jim.
Hello, and hello folks at home. I'm absolutely stoked to be here in the room of rambling. So we did have to climb over a lot to get in, didn't we?
We did. We're both completely and utterly surrounded by our stuff. So, Jim, for the people at home, let people know what Hypnogoria is all about.
It was a website I started devoted to all things weird and wonderful. I started out writing little reviews, and then I got the bug for podcasting, and I've been going 13 years now. which kind of makes me one of the oldest horror podcasts in the UK. I'm one of the dinosaurs. But yeah, still going strong, covering movies, TV, comics, bits of folklore, anything weird and wonderful that takes my fancy. And it's also expanded to 2 other shows. I do another one, Commentary Club, with my good wife, where we literally talk through a movie and ruin it. Where we have a rotating roster. We do a cult film, a classic film, and a crap film, which is a lot of fun. And then I've also got another show called From the Great Library of Dreams, where I read classic bits of weird fiction, which is something I did on the main show, but I kind of hived that off so people who just want the stories can just have the stories.
Yeah, and I was saying to you before we started recording that your podcast was such an inspiration for me and encouraged me to start podcasting. And I urge anybody who hasn't listened to it to go out and have a listen. If you were starting, where would you recommend people to start?
Well, if you go to my website, hypnogoria.com, I've done that many shows. I don't actually have a full list of episodes, but I have sorted out bunches of episodes into different series. So I've done a history of the zombie movies. I'm currently still getting to the end of finishing a series on the history of Universal Horror, or there's like a big section just devoted to cult TV show and children's book Box of Delights. And you can find like story readings or bits on folklore or bits on weird telly or comics or games, which I've covered as well. And you can just there's a nice selection there on the main page on the website, and you can go just dive in and have a nice selection on a theme of your choice.
It's a kind of podcast with the word potpourri is invented for, wasn't it?
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah. If I could recommend one, I would definitely recommend your coverage of fighting fantasy. There's some great insights in that podcast in particular, and there is a very, very funny moment, which I won't ruin for people. But yes. But we're here today to talk about films, and in particular, Moviedrome. For people who are not sure what Moviedrome is, Jim, how would you summarise it?
Well, kind of in the 70s and the 80s, BBC Two, which is kind of the artier of the main terrestrial BBC channels, often used to do seasons of films. And say like they do a season of, say, late night showing like Hitchcock, or they do a season of Chaplin. I mean, when I was growing up, they showed all the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes, and they showed all the old Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan. And this proved very, very popular, these sort of themed, sort of curated sort of collections. It became more and more of a thing. In the late 70s, they started doing late-night horror double bills on BBC Two on a Saturday, which were tremendously important to, well, a couple of generations of young film geeks growing up, where they'd always show a creaky old black and white one and then a colour one that was often a bit racier and a bit gorier. But they were tremendous fun, and kind of that sort of drew to a close so in the mid-80s. After a fallow couple of years, something else came along. And it was almost like cult film scheduling had grown up with the audience. Because this one's Sunday nights. It was hosted by cult film director himself, Alex Cox. And it was called Moviedrome. And every Sunday night, he would introduce and present a series of cult movies. In his own inimitable style, which I will now badly imitate. Hello, welcome to Moviedrome. Tonight, we've got a film which you won't have heard of. But I have, so that's all right.
Very good, yes.
And this proved to be very popular, and it actually ran for years and years. I mean, there were fairly extensive seasons running for like good 3-4 months. And then he'd come back, have a break, then he'd come back the following year with another tranche of like really weird films, often you'd never heard of. So it ran and ran, and eventually he was replaced by another up-and-coming sort of critic, Mark Cousins. And I think it finally ended in the late 90s. It ran for a tremendously long time, and I was surprised how long it had run when I look back. But then again, I do remember always watching, what's on Moviedrome this week? Have I seen that? Have I even heard of that? Am I going to watch that? Set the video.
It's fair to say that Mark Cousins had his distinctive style as well, didn't he?
He did.
That's quite a soporific, the seriousness of this. It kind of didn't speak, he mumbled in a kind of Irish lilt.
It was like ASMR.
I think at the end of the 80s, it was incredibly influential on me, Moviedrome. I was 20 at that time, and it was a big part of my film education. I think Cox's introductions, to begin with, as you say, they were a bit disjointed, and for some reason they had like a weird late night saxophone blaring over these little... And he was in a motel room set.
Well, that's right, or in the middle of a desert, or somewhere really weird, and kind of like nothing to do with the film either. It was like it was just wherever he was at the time, and he had a cameraman said, "Right, we'll do it here then."
But over time, they definitely got more and more fluent, and he started to introduce, to me at least, some of the language of cinema, and start to point out things just in these little 5-minute introductions, with a directorial eye, but also with a critical eye. He wasn't coming on, pitching for the films, was he? He gave a critique rather than a showman's, this film's great, you'd have to watch this film. It's much more balanced and nuanced than that.
It's very much kind of almost like kind of the introduction you'd probably get from a lecturer at film school. This is a film. This is when it was made. Now, watch out for this. You might find this, but watch out for that. And it was actually a very good way to set you up for the kind of film you're going into and kind of what sort of angle to approach it from. I think it was very, very helpful. And I say, I learnt so much about movies watching these strange offerings, because when it started out, it was like cult movies. We're going, yes, we're going to get some science fiction, we're going to get some horror, we'll get some men with rubber swords, this is going to be brilliant. But a lot of the films were actually really, really cult, and kind of cult maybe only among film students, you know what I mean? It's kind of, here's a movie, Marlon Brando's only movie he made. Or here's a bizarre Western starring Joan Crawford, or here's Brad Dourif as an insane preacher who gets obsessed with cars. And, it's kind of all these really strange films. And I remember kind of Saturday night was our role-playing night, where we'd go around to our friend's house who, he had a dining room with a big dining room table. But on Sunday nights was like we do character gen, or work on our rubbish fanzine we did back in the day. A Doomed Dwarf's Journal. But so me and my friend Gabby, I'd go around and draw some stuff for him, help with layouts, and then we'd watch Moviedrome, and the dad was going like, what the hell did we just watch?
But I think it's worth pointing out that at this time, in the UK, there was only 4 channels, to watch, and you kind of heard about these, cult movie, cable channels over in the US, and it felt like you were getting a little bit of that, a little hint of that, this strand of programming. I got quite excited by, because that's the thing, isn't it? There wasn't a great deal of variety on UK television at that time. I think Sky started a year later, didn't it? In '89. But this gave us a flavour of what specialist cable channels would be like.
Very much so. And I think even then it was still quite ahead of what cable television would be delivering in the early days, at least, where it tended to be very populist. I mean, the kind of films you get on Moviedrome were the kind of films you'd normally only catch at an art house cinema on first run. And
yes. Yeah.
And, there weren't in the main films you'd say find on video down the local Blockbuster, or you even considered to be shown on most TV stations. I mean, the only sort of place you'd see films like this was kind of at like specialist cinemas, like the famous ones like, the Scala in London that I'd heard about, had these sort of legendary film nights of showing double and treble bills of weird movies you'd never heard of. And this was kind of, it had that sort of vibe, you know what I mean? Of it was like every Sunday night, a little art house cinema opened up in your own living room at late night when everyone else had gone to bed. And you should be going to bed because it was a school night or you had work, but you didn't care because you would never get a chance to see something like this again. Well, certainly that's how it was at the time. I mean, now you can get all of these with 2 clicks probably in 4K on a 6-disc set. But, that's the marvels of the 20th century, where appalling films like Invasion of the Blood Farmers has got a high-definition 4K restoration.
Yeah, that's a very good point that about the cinemas, because around this time, and I think due in no small part to this season of films, it gave me the confidence to start going to places where they screened more cult films. So in Manchester, Corner House opened in 85, but I only just started going around 88. And in Liverpool, there was the 051, and that's where I got most of my film education, spending all day when I should have been at college in 051, watching Taxi Driver and all these new Hollywood films that were being shown, because they seemed to get a new lease of life in the 80s. And thematically, some of these films in the first season owe a certain debt to that new Hollywood period, don't they?
Definitely. I mean, I was much the same, because it wasn't long after Moviedrome kind of... my friend Gavin passed his driving test, and we discovered there was an art house cinema in Newcastle, about 35 minutes drive out the Tyneside Cinema. And that was always, nearly every week, had some sort of late night, midnight showing. And they had regular like Rocky showings, things like Rocky Horror. But they'd have really weird double bills, like Sid and Nancy and Cat People. Films that don't belong together at all to anyone else's mind. But to a film buff's mind, it's two great films from two different eras, but you don't care the two different genres. And that Moviedrome was very much like that. You might have an expected cult film one week, and then next week it'd be something you'd be going, what the hell is that?
And, of course, Sid and Nancy is one of Alex Cox's
Absolutely,
films,
yes, yeah.
I've got his quote that he made to help define what would be included in the season. So I thought it'd be useful for me just to read that and to see whether we can take... we agree with this description of what a cult film is. So what is a cult film? Well, a cult film is one that has a passionate following but does not appeal to everyone. James Bond are not cult films, but chainsaw movies are. Just because a film has become a cult movie does not automatically guarantee quality. Some are very bad. Others are very, very good. Some of them make an awful lot of money at the box office. Others make no money at all. Some are considered quality films. Others are exploitation movies. One thing that cult films do have in common is that they're all genre films. For example, gangster films or westerns. They also have a tendency to slosh over from one genre to another, so that a science fiction film might be a detective movie or vice versa. They share common themes as well, themes that are found in all drama: love, murder, and greed. So what do you think that as a description of cult movies, do you think that captures it?
It's pretty good. I mean, it's one of those things, defining a cult film is tricky. I mean, on Commentary Club, we take turns to pick a film and surprise each other. And my wife always moans when it's cult film time, because it's kind of what is cult? Because, I mean, with Moviedrome, the very first movie in the very first season Alex Cox picked was The Wicker Man, which at that point in the 80s was very much a cult film. It had died at the box office. It had never had a re-release. It'd gone through some awful cuts that had been released that made the film unintelligible in the US. It'd been occasionally shown on late night TV, and it had picked up a following of people going, this movie's actually pretty good. And when it was shown on Moviedrome, it was still very much just considered, this is one of those films those horror movie people go on about. But like now, it's regarded as a true classic of British cinema. And it's kind of that. I mean, that's gone from being a nothing film that failed to developing a cult to becoming popular to becoming, kind of enshrined in the canon. So I think it's very difficult to define cult films, and especially nowadays when people make films with an eye to being cult in the first place. It's like, I'd argue most of the films that have come out of Trauma, bar the first few, aren't cult films because they were made with a to try and be cult films, and that's sort of, it's like being cool. You can't declare yourself cool; it must be conferred upon you.
Exactly.
Like cult films are kind of like that.
That's very true, isn't it? Since the 90s, many films have had a knowing glint in their eye, haven't they, as they've been producing these films with an eye to becoming cult. It's quite interesting that when they showed The Wicker Man as part of Moviedrome, it was the first time that it was a restored print with some of the things that were cut out of the original. It wasn't the entire print, because as you know, much of that was recovered in the late 90s, but this was like the first showing of an extended cut.
Well, that's it, Alex. I videoed The Wicker Man when it had been on TV a couple of years earlier, and then I'd seen a shorter version on a different ITV station, and it was kind of had scenes missing and scenes in the wrong order. And then when the Moviedrome came on, it was kind of like, oh my god, these things I'd not seen in either version were in there as well. And it would be another 4 or 5 years, mid-90s, we actually got kind of the almost complete as you can cut, the director's cut, available on DVD. So, I mean, Alex Cox did a lot more than just sort of go through the archive saying, well, what have we got and what can we afford? You know what I mean? He really actually tried to get you decent copies of the film. I know that in the first season there's a Marlon Brando movie, the one he directed, and that had fallen into public domain. And most of the prints of it knocking around were absolutely awful. You know what I mean? But he actually got a pretty decent one. So he really sort of did a lot of work behind the scenes to really give you a proper, curated collection and find the best print he could.
Yeah. That's what One-Eyed Jacks,
That's
isn't
it, yes, yeah.
Brando films, yeah. Yeah. The bit I take exception with the cult film description is this idea that they're all genre films, because there are non-genre films in this season.
Definitely.
You struggle to, how would you define Fat City, for example? I've heard like a neo-noir, but to me it's just a drama, isn't it?
Basically, it's kind of, I don't mean to sound demeaning, but it's kind of like an art house Rocky. It's a boxing movie, but it's not like Rocky or The Champ. It's scrubbed clean of any kind of sentiment. And the usual, beats of a sports movie have been really cut out with a laser, and instead you've got what is a lot of extended character studies that of people in terrible situations, in run-down places, just struggling to get by. And you could say as a genre it's an art house drama, really. Because I would argue that something like art house is almost a genre in itself, more so now than back then. I think things have ossified in a strange way in the last, few years, certainly. And now if you say cult film, people think, it's going to be sci-fi, horror or fantasy. That's what cult means to most people. It's that spaceman crap. It's people with swords and monsters in it. But actually, cult films are a very broad palette. Anything can be a cult film. It just has to have somehow ended up in that strange headspace where it alienates most people, but some people go, yes, that's it. I love that. That's got something.
Yeah. And a couple of years ago, I started watching these films in the order that they were broadcasting Moviedrome. And a bit like you, Jim, I like to curate my home viewing and make sure that I have a little mini season. So as a challenge, I started to watch these in order. And I have to say that Fat City is a film that I didn't remember from the original viewing of it, but that was the one that really got to me, and I thought, this is a great movie. This is a fantastic. It's often overlooked, isn't it? Because it was in that period of New Hollywood, and there's probably more well-known films from that era. But yeah, it's an incredible film.
Yeah, because I caught it. I think it was in Lancaster. An art house cinema showed it in the 90s. I remember seeing it on Moviedrome. Oh, that'll be worth seeing on the big screen. I thought, a bit depressing actually, but what the hell? But I thought it was a really good movie, and I kind of really got just the whole title sums up the idea of Fat City. People, they want to get to the good life. You know what I mean? And but they're never gonna. Almost,
No,
you know what I mean?
no.
And the fact that it doesn't have that happy endings. There are resolutions, but you know what I mean? There's no magic wand. All the nastiness is going to go away now at the end. I really appreciate that. And it's something we don't see enough of, really. We often see a lot of nihilistic endings, which is kind of the anti, magic one. Just everyone dies, boo-hoo. It's horrible, isn't it? Yes, it was. But you don't often get that kind of, where people just tie up a storyline dramatically and leave it at that without going one way or the other.
And it is an incredible ending as well, the way that he does it. We won't spoil it for people, but it's a bit of a cinematic masterclass, really, at the end.
Definitely.
And I love that the opening scenes with Jeff Bridges and Stacey Keach sparring, that metaphor of, the downtrodden Keach and the plucky youngster.
Yes.
But yeah, it's brilliant. And obviously with Hypnogoria, if you were plucking out from this first season, what would be hypnogoric films from this collection? We mentioned The Wicker Man.
Well, it's obviously The Wicker Man, but you've got the original Fly and the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And Body Snatchers is a very interesting movie with its subtext. But probably the most hypnogoric, there's The Man Who Fell to Earth as well. But there's one, I just recently got hold of a lovely restored cut of it. The Long Hair of Death with Barbara Steele.
Oh, yes, Barbara Steele. Fantastic.
And that's a cracking movie, because at first it sounds like your sort of typical 60s Hammer horror gothic setup. There's a witch, she's going to be burned. She is burnt, and she lays a curse on the nobleman who did it and his descendants. And you think, oh yes, I know where we're going with this. It's all in a moody castle. Several years later, she's going to come back from the grave and bump them off, and it'll be all creepy and eerie. But the movie doesn't actually play out like that. And it ends up something almost Hitchcockian in a medieval castle, where people are scheming and conniving and getting more and more paranoid as they're trying to do each other over. I'm trying not to give away any plot spoilers, but it's a really fascinating film. It's beautifully shot, really well acted, but it's about, you start off with something very gothic, but then you end up with something that almost feels very modern, this kind of a psychological thriller. And it's like just really well performed, especially as several characters sort of seemingly begin to disintegrate under psychological pressure.
It feels like a Mario Bava film, but it isn't Mario Bava, is it, who directed it?
No, it owes a lot to Bava's Black Sunday. And indeed, if you look at the subplot synopsis, you think, hang on, isn't this Black Sunday again? Italian ripping each other themselves off. Now, this is Antonio Margheriti. He went on to have a long career in Italian cult movies. This is one of his best, actually. But if I remember right, he also really did some good giallos as well. And this has a very giallo feel. He also did some bloody appalling things as well a bit later on, like Your Hunter from the Future, which is one of the weirder and worse Conan rip-offs.
Cox recommended the Western that he made with Klaus Kinski as well, Death in the Wind.
Yes, yeah.
It's quite an unusual Western. There's quite a Western feel to quite a few of these, isn't there?
If you got the Peter Fonda film, Hired Hands, I do remember watching that one vividly, because it was we kind of knew Peter Fonda was this sort of counterculture icon, and at that stage, we were just discovering the music press and discovering 60s sort of music, and Easy Rider was kind of the film we wanted to see. But this was a film Peter Fonda made after Easy Rider, so, it's a Western, I don't care, we'll give it a go. That's an interesting movie. I think in many ways it got short shrift at the time, but there's a lot of it in there that, when I think back to it, is it'll be done again to greater acclaim by Clint Eastwood in The Unforgiven. Idea of the truth of the West and the sort of corrosive effect of a violent lifestyle, and it's not all six guns and trick shots. It's actually people dying in the dust, often for stupid and pointless reasons.
Yeah, because around that time, wasn't it, when Universal and these main studios were giving money to individual auteur directs after Easy Rider and giving money to produce things. And this is what Peter Fonda came out. And I didn't. What was it that Dennis Hopper did? The last movie show, was it?
Oh yes,
I think around this, yeah, which was crazy.
That's a mad film.
Yes.
It's also why the Monkeys movie Head is so bizarre as well, because they gave them the money and let them loose.
Yeah. And although, there's some pretty classic westerns like The Good, the Bad and the Ugly and, as we mentioned, One-Eyed Jacks, and there's the Joan Crawford unusual one, Johnny Guitar, but there's also Electrogliding Blue, which is in Arizona, and that's got a real western feel to it. And that's another film that when I watched it again as part of this Moviedrome rewatch, that's quite a striking film as well. Really well done and unusual film.
Well, that was one I was really excited to see because in the second Judge Dredd annual in 1982, they did a little feature about sort of films about cops and vehicles, and they mentioned obviously Mad Max, but the other film they mentioned was Electrogliding Blue, which that's a wonderful title. And you didn't really say much about it, but there's a cop and he's hunting a criminal, and there's a cool picture of Robert Blake on this vintage 70s beautiful police motorcycle, and Electrogliding Blue. You think, yeah, this is the film for me. And then when it came on the TV, I must admit it was that wasn't really what I was expecting. But I did really like it though, because I think I had seen some spaghetti westerns and it had that same sort of mood and vibe and that sort of attention to realism and grittiness, but at the same time with those sort of panoramic landscapes. It's a great movie. That was genuinely very cult up into the 90s. It seems to have dropped off the radar a bit recently, which is a shame because it's an absolutely fantastic film. I mean, if people like things like No Country for Old Men, go see Electrogliding Blue, because that's very much, informing that those sort of modernist sort of bleak visionary movies.
Yeah, it's kind of a reactionary response to Easy Rider in a way as well, isn't it?
Well, very much so, because instead of going across America with a ton of money made from drugs, you've got a cop hunting down a bunch of hippies, basically. Some of which were the band Chicago, I discovered much later on, who were actually extras in the film as well as doing the music. It's kind of really soft rockers Chicago, these scuzzy hippies.
Yeah, well, I think the director, I forget his name now, he was actually the manager of Chicago. It's the only film that he made. He was a record producer. And, I think, he fell out with filmmaking, but he made sure that the band had, plenty of opportunities. I think he went on to, manage the Beach Boys in the late 70s or something like that, but turned his back on film. But this is his only film that he made.
Well, that's often the way with cult films. They're often these one-off movies that people struggle to get made, and often thought, that's it, I'm done now. Or, they lost a lot of money and it only much later on would pay for itself.
And now there's nothing I like more than a good monster movie. Unfortunately, Razorback isn't a great monster movie.
No, I wanted to like Razorback. I've always wanted to like Razorback, but it just doesn't really work.
I definitely think you should suggest that for your podcast, your commentary club.
If it comes on streaming, we will. Because my wife's a Aussie, so we do like to do some exploitation because she has a different take on these things because she saw them in context at the time, But yeah, same director as Highlander, and hard to believe, but also same director as Highlander 2, and that's much easier to believe.
Yeah. So this is a rampaging it's a pig, isn't it?
Well,
it's a pig, a wild
yeah.
pig. Yeah, that's terrorizing the 8-bag.
It's a strange concept, and it is kind of, should we do something like Jaws? Yeah. What should we use? How about a pig? Okay. What? I didn't know there were wild boars in Australia.
Well, there is now.
I mean, the creature itself, when you see it, is kind of like, it is a thing to behold. It looks like something that's come off a heavy metal album cover. You know what I mean? There's more than a touch of a Motorhead's logo in it. So I'm looking at going, first time watching it, is it part robot? There seems to be some chrome in there somewhere.
And the way the whole thing's shot actually is reminiscent of a rock video, that style of filmmaking from the 80s that came prominent, where there's bright lights and people in silhouette and that kind of thing. Crash
zooms, people swinging the camera around, and a few more guitar solos. I think might have helped actually. There's an occasional shot of Slash on a rock playing away, enlivened the movie. So it's one of the films where you start going, can I see the pig now?
One of the things that Cox says about this season, because inevitably when you put a season together of these films, I'm going to reveal something to you, Jim, that you may not know about these seasons. But when you see all these films together, they're quite diverse and different, but you inevitably try to look for thematic connections, don't you? And what Cox said is that these films are about murder and greed as a kind of a common theme running through them. And do you think that is there any other themes that you can spot within them? Any commonalities?
There's definitely a lot of murder in them. But a lot of them have a strong sense of landscape as well, which I think and it was very. I mean, I think he had a very good director's eye. He picked a lot of films with a strong visual look. Razor Black is a terrible monster movie, but it does look good. Big Wednesday, the surfer movie, has some fantastic sequences, even though perhaps the cast weren't really up to delivering the drama. Going back in time, you wouldn't do a serious drama with Jan Michael Vincent and William Catt.
Yeah. Well, Gary Busey.
Gary Busey, he always
steals a show, doesn't he?
Always gives 110%, whether you want him to or not. You might have sanded teeth marks out the set later on, but he will deliver.
Well, I'm going to make the revelation and see if this changes your outlook. Alex Cox did not choose these films.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, so what happened was the BBC had all of these films on the books, on their catalogue, under license, and producer Nick Jones just kind of cobbled them together and thought, where are we going to show these? At what point are we going to show Razorback alongside One from the Heart, Francis Ford Coppola's musical of burlesque? And so he came up with this idea of having a cult film segment, and he hired Cox in to present them. And I think Cox is great because he actually makes it appear curated.
Yes.
And, with his introductions, he does make it, he gives the illusion of this being handpicked and selected for your entertainment. Really works. But it was a BBC producer, Nick Jones, who chose them all.
Oh, that's amazing. Did that remain the case in later seasons? Because I imagine they'd always had so many films they'd licensed as part of a bundle, and they were thinking, we can never show this in an ordinary slot. But we have to get value for money for the license payer.
Exactly. I think later on, you're right, they did. And I think particularly when Mark Cousins was doing it. But I think what that allowed it was that idea that Cox could be quite critical about some of the films. So, for example, the introduction to Diva, he's quite disparaging about the whole artifice of it and its kind of lack of humanity and this kind of commercial eye that it's done with. So I think him having that distance from the films that have been picked really added to it in some way.
Well, I think it's also got that sort of diversity as well of kind of a really interesting mix of movies that you wouldn't necessarily put together. I always remember with Moviedrome, it always went beyond the standard easy definition of a cult film, and you would get these sort of genuine curios in there. And I always sort of liked that, and I like that kind of grab bag aesthetic. You're not always going to get something what you want, or something you'd have chosen for yourself. But often some of the more obscure films were the most rewarding to watch.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you're dead right. Yeah, and I think I love as doing armchair curation of seasons. And if you were looking at this season, Jim, and you had to pick out 3 that you were going to put as your Hypnogoria season, which are the 3 that you would pick?
Oh, I'd definitely have Long Hair of Death. I'd probably do The Man Who Fell to Earth, because I think that's a film a lot of sci-fi fans and a lot of music fans come to. Oh, it's about a spaceman. Oh, it's got David Bowie in it. And you sit down and watch it and you get this weird Nick Road film and go, oh, bloody hell, what was that? I'm really unsettled and confused. So I definitely pick that because I think that's a film you should go back to. Certainly. And
the best Bowie performance, I would say. Best acting.
Definitely. I think it's such a striking and weird film, but it is kind of, if you're there to see a pop star in a movie, or you're there to see a film about a spaceman who comes to Earth, and you're at a young age, shall we say, it will completely blow your mind. To quote Ziggy Stardust. But I'd say definitely pick that one as it's one to go back to. But the other one I'd say pick for it's not bloody Razorback. And not The Wicker Man, because it's too obvious. But I would go for Barbarella, because that's a very sort of fun movie, but it's also very rooted in kind of the European science fiction comics tradition. And for like a show like mine, where I really like to not just review a film, but put it into its context and dig out, where it came from, what its influences were. Barbarella is a really interesting one because, it opens up this whole thing that, unbeknown to most of us, France has this huge comics tradition and a huge comics industry that we're largely unaware of, bar Tintin and Asterix. But they have an incredibly rich, comics tradition, and they were doing mind-blowing, science fiction comics back in the 50s even, and it was in the heyday in the 60s and the 70s. And Barbarella opens all that up, and it's actually a lot of that's all there in the feel and look of it as well. So that'd be my third pick.
Yeah, Barbarella is one of those films that I thought I knew. But when rewatching it as part of this exercise, I realised that I didn't know it at all, and I'd either pushed to the back of my mind or never seen before the scary dolls with teeth.
Yes. There's a lot of very striking imagery in there. I think Barbarella often gets a bit short shrift because people, it's just Jane Fonda being scantily clad in a Flash Gordon ripoff, but there's so much more to that movie. It's a lot crazier, and I don't know. I think that it's another film that I think it's almost became too cult and everyone knows it sort of second hand through homages and ripoffs, but people should go back to the original.
Yeah, definitely. I think of my top 3. I've already mentioned Fat City, but I know that when I saw The Last Picture Show as part of this back in 88, that because I think it's because of the age I was at, that had a kind of lasting effect, and I did seek out Bogdanovich's other films and his writing as a result of seeing that film. Because I think at the time you knew Sybil Shepherd from her appearances on Moonlighting and kind of frivolous figure, but in that she gives a great performance, and as do all the actors in it. It's quite a striking film, and again with a kind of Western sensibility. It feels like a big John Ford movie about children in a
town that's dying.
In a
really.
town.
Yeah,
a dying town. Yeah,
I mean, I remember that vividly because I remember kind of coming on it. I say Moonlighting was like kind of at its height when this was screened. I know a lot of people tuned into Sybil Shepherd, and I heard it's a bit rude, and it is a bit rude. You'll see her do things that you thought you wanted to see, but not like that. It won't be exciting or erotic. It'll actually be rather depressing and make you question your life choices. But that's why it's a brilliant film. I mean,
and the other film I choose out of these is Parallax View, which I think is a remarkable study of American paranoia and just a general peak of 70s cinema.
That's a fantastic film. I know that made a big impression on us. I mean, I know in a great many of our role-playing games afterwards started featuring shadowy assassination agencies for months. Huge, bleak conspiracies you couldn't get out of. But, I mean, I saw that again fairly recently, and I was struck by just what a good movie it is. At the time it got short shrift because it felt it was being a bit too real. It's a bit slow, but I kind of like that, and I like the grittiness and the believability, and it's actually, I think, Warren Beatty's best performance. It's the film everyone forgets and somewhat overshadowed by his own reputation as a heartthrob. But, on his day, he could put in a very powerful performance. And he's brilliant in the Parallax View. You forget it's Warren Beatty completely. And they say it's such a gorgeous slice of that sort of 70s anxiety and paranoia and intrigue.
Definitely. And as we come to the close, I'd like you to have a look at this list, and of the films that are in here, if you could replace one with an equivalent, what would you do, and what would be your rationale for doing it?
I know it is. I'm just looking through which one I get rid of. Razorback. Yeah, I've got my eye on you. The thing I think it's actually missing is a good 70s Italian movie. And I'd swap out Razorback for an early 70s Pseudo Giallo. It was an Italian-American co-production. And it has some American stars like Martin Landau as in guest roles. It's got various names, like one's got like some variation on Magnum Force, the Cashing on Dirty Harry. But its proper title is Strange Shadows in an Empty Room. And it's about a cop investigating the death of his daughter. And basically he's like a typical 70s cop. He's not going to stop for anybody. And his first line of questioning is to smack someone in the mouth. And he basically brawls and fights his way and intimidates and bullies people until he unravels what really happened. While there is another killer on the loose, seemingly bumping off witnesses. And it features one of the most amazing car chases I've ever seen. I mean, where people talk about the one in Bullet, that's nothing compared in this movie, where you have a guy, the cop's chasing a guy he wants to question. And they literally drive their cars until they're smoking wrecks of battered metal. It's incredible movie, and no one's heard of it. But that's my pick. Strange Shadows in an Empty Room. It was actually on
Strange Shadows.
Yeah, it was on Amazon Prime until fairly recently. That's where I first found it. But in the way of things, it probably will turn up again on another streaming service. But I highly recommend it. I mean, it was a film I watched and couldn't believe what I was watching. But it's also a very good murder mystery as well, and actually has a good deal of social commentary baked into it as well as being just stupidly violent.
Well, I'm going to be controversial and the opening film, I'm going to switch out The Wicker Man. And the reason I say that is because I think it has become very familiar, hasn't it?
Definitely.
The Wicker Man.
Definitely.
And perhaps a little overexposed as a cult movie. And it obviously was originally played in a double bill. And I would say that the film that it appeared alongside is a much superior film, and that's Don't Look Now.
Yes,
which is a great film set in Venice with Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland as grieving parents, and him realizing that he has powers.
Yes.
Or he doesn't realize he doesn't realize he has powers. He's ignorant of his powers. But that is a remarkable movie, and probably one of my all-time favourites. Don't Look Now. So
there's a certain scene in it that will stay with you forever.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you very much, Jim. It's been great talking to you about Moviedrome. We'll have to get back together and do another season.
Absolutely, I'd love to do that. There's an excuse to rewatch some of these films as well.
Yeah, brilliant. And just to remind everybody, where will they find Hypnogoria?
Well, you can find everything I do, including all the podcasts and various bits of writing I do as well, at hypnogoria.com, which is arranged into handy, hopefully easy to navigate sections.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jim.
My pleasure,
and all
sir.
the best.
Speed rating.
Welcome to the room of role-playing rambling. I've got Blythe with me. Hello, Blythe.
Hello, Dirk.
I feel, Blythe, like we should be in a wainscoted room with wooden panelling and a leather-buttoned chair with a fire raging and a big balloon glass of brandy.
And a cigar.
Yeah.
Why do you feel that?
Because Vaesen.
We're going to talk about Vaesen. Is it Vaesen? Vaesen.
Oh, Vaesen.
I don't know, it's Vaesen.
Vaesen.
There's a lot. You know what we're like with pronunciations. We struggle the best of times.
I think just settle on one. Vaesen.
We're taking on Vaesen, even though I've heard, I think it's Vaesen. But who knows?
We'll stick with our long vowels.
People know what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I can't offer you a brandy.
No.
We're back in the stock cupboard, aren't we?
The work stock cupboard. Yeah. There is no brandy. There probably is a bottle of brandy in here. There's still, I see the Robinson's Fruit cordial is still there.
It has for 15 years.
For
and
15
I've noticed disturbingly that the tide mark has moved a little.
Someone's had some of the out-of-date cordial.
Yeah. They've been over the Christmas break, they've come in here and thought, I want a taste of summer. And,
even if it's an out-of-date summer, doesn't matter.
There's another strange thing come in the corner.
Yeah.
What's that? It's like I thought it was a big drainage pole at the first, like a big brush. But, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, what a strange thing. This works well on a podcast, doesn't it? People, what the hell are they talking about? It looks like a quick release Christmas tree, doesn't it? As if you push a button and all the branches come out all of a sudden.
A big flu. Yeah. Let's talk about Vaesen. I know that this is a game that you're particularly enthusiastic
I like Vaesen, I do.
Because you've run it quite a lot as one-shots. I think you played this... I have not played this a lot with you, other than that short campaign, but you've played it a lot, haven't you?
I've been a player once at Grogmeet. That was the first time I've been a player, but I've run it a lot. I've run it at a few conventions, yeah. I really like it. It's probably, well, not probably. I think it is my favourite Free League game.
Right.
By some way. I like Tales from the Loop. But I think Vaesen is my favourite. For reasons we may get into.
Yeah. So just so that people are aware of it, it came out, when did it come out? About
2 or 3 years ago?
2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah. Don't know.
It was a Kickstarter. Did you go into the Kickstarter?
No, I didn't go into the Kickstarter. I bought it. It was a lockdown purchase. It was one of the crazy lockdown purchases that paid off. It was one of those purchases where I'd heard about Vaesen, and I think I bought Tales from the Loop, and I liked the system, and I thought, well, I'll buy Vaesen. I went all in bought the Games Master screen, as you do, and the funny dice. It might have been some kind of deal on Freely. You know, they do these deals every now and again. So I bought it. That's how I bought it. I bought the rules, the Games Master screen, some dice.
The cards? Did you get?
Yeah, I got the cards as well. Yeah, I think it was a package thing. You know, slight discounts on it, that kind of thing. I think it's a great game, and it's for those who don't know it, it's a kind of gothic. It's described as gothic horror, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although Nordic gothic horror, but I suppose the horror thing is debatable, because I think you can dial that up. There's a bit of whimsy to it as well, isn't there?
Yeah,
I think. So it's set in Scandinavia, so Sweden, but also Finland, Denmark, even bits of Russia. You know, that neck of the woods, northern Europe, far north of Europe, in the Victorian era. So it's up to you when in the Victoria. You can have it early Victorian or late Victorian. And in the game, you play, it's quite specific, the setting and the setup of it, isn't it? So in the game, you play these people who've got what's called the sight. So you can see supernatural beings. And in the game, most of the supernatural beings, creatures from myth like trolls or, you know, fairies, ghosts, all those kind of things, can choose whether they're visible or not. But as people with the sight, you can see them all the time. That's the gist of it. And you are members of a thing called the Society, based in Uppsala in Sweden, where you have this castle, don't you, that you operate from, sorting out supernatural problems. And one of the kind of driving things behind it is the idea of the Industrial Revolution encroaching on the traditions which kept the supernatural creatures at bay. So, for example, you might have a forest where there's an ash tree wife who's a creature that lives in the forest, and the local villagers have always kind of respected her and this kind of thing. And then along comes a industrial forestry kind of, you know, company who wants to chop the forest down and make, you know, get a logging company, that kind of thing, and it upsets the supernatural equilibrium of things. And your job is to kind of try and sort that problem out. Sometimes the supernatural creature is villainous and needs dealing with, but sometimes it's misunderstandings, isn't it? And sometimes the humans are the real problem rather than the supernatural creature who's just become upset or disturbed by the modern world encroaching. And that's the gist of it, basically.
It's as if the Brothers Grimm wrote Deliverance.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a bit, yeah.
And the thing to say about it, I bought it as well, and I think I must have bought it. It's the same thing, because I didn't invest in the Kickstarter, but I got a package together. And it is a beautiful book, isn't it? That's what
it is a beautiful book.
Me to it.
Yeah.
And it's based on the illustrations by Johan Egerkrans.
Yeah. Yeah, it is based on a book of illustrations, isn't it? It's built around that.
And the monsters are brilliant, aren't they? The illustrations are absolutely fantastic. And what I recall from it is, you know, you rightly said that horror you can dial up and down, but it takes me, there is a nostalgic value to it because it reminds me of the Beaver Book of horror.
Yeah.
And I think I talked about this when we talked about Dragon Warriors, because I think there's a connection between Dragon Warriors and Vaesen in the way that it deals with monsters and the monstrous.
Yes. Yeah.
In that it is gothic, hauntology, that kind of sense that it's folksy horror.
Yes, yeah, folksy horror. And it has things, none of the monsters are throwaway. I think that's what's good about it. None of the monsters are throwaway monsters. It doesn't do cannon fodder kobolds, does it? It's not that kind of game. Every monster has its own background and mythologies and traditions and beliefs people have about these things. And also they all most of them, most of them certainly, have like rituals that you have to do to get rid of them. So there's certain rituals to banish them and that kind of thing, which you've got to kind of discover. So it's not, whilst there is fighting in it, it's not a fighty game as in let's go and kill some monsters. It's not quite as straightforward as that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about negotiating with the monster or performing a ritual to banish the monster or appease it, something like that. So it's not just monster. It kind of is monster hunting, but it's not just hunting a monster
and destroying it.
Although there are some nasty monsters in it that need to be destroyed, but not all of them. Some are they're more complicated than that, and that's what's entertaining about it. I know when we've played, we had our Sunday night group played it, didn't we? And that's what was interesting about it, was it's not just a case of, right, there's the monster, let's go in and kill the thing, because a lot of them can't be killed.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the monsters in it, if you hit them hard enough with swords and bullets, they might disappear into vapour, but a few days later they kind of come back. So you have to deal with it in a different way, really.
And the reason why we called Daniel Farson's Beaver Book of Horror, which was the grounding of my love of monsters, is that it treats them in a similar way with a straight bat, as though they are part of our existence as human beings. They kind of coexist with us, and we have to deal with them.
Yeah.
And I think at the basis of it, there's 6 principles, and I think you covered some of them, haven't you? That it says that these monsters are neither good nor evil, that nature is dark and dangerous, that Scandinavia is changing, and I think this is key to it, that knowledge is key to success. So the investigation is trying to find that vulnerability, isn't it, of the monster?
Yeah. And knowledge both ways as well, both the knowledge, finding out about the monster, and finding out the knowledge of what it wants and what it's doing and why is it upset. But equally, that knowledge that's been lost by modern society. So modern society, modern industrial Victorian society, dismisses that knowledge as nonsense. It's just nonsense. Why are you worrying about that? But at its peril, because of course by dismissing it, the balance of the world is altering. So it's knowledge both ways, isn't it?
And the next 2 principles are interesting when we come to look at it mechanically, because it says that journey is part of the goal, and we're in this together. So you're not going to defeat this single-handedly. It requires all of your as a team, as a society, has to come together to defeat it. So this is speed rating, and when we do speed rating, we've done a quick review of it. The next bit is just Blythy's rules. So you've got to pick out 3 highlights from the rules.
It's difficult to do this, because I do, and this will come across, may have already come across, I'm a huge fan of the game. So it's difficult to distill it down to 3 rules that I like.
And I guess it is the core rule set of Free League games, isn't it? That Year Zero engine. So there is that overall. Before we talk about 3 specific things, I do like that Free League system, the dice pool. So it is that thing of you have an attribute and a skill, and that tells you how many d6 you roll, and you roll a handful of d6s, and if you get a 6, you've succeeded, that kind of thing. Sometimes more successes gives you extra things and that kind of stuff, but that's the basic principle of it, and it works very, very well, I think, and it's quite fluid and quite narrative. I think it works well in this kind of setting and in this kind of context, in the same way it does with Tales from the Loop. I think it gets a little more brutal and harsher when you're in a setting like Mutant Year Zero or Alien, where it becomes quite
and can get
brutal.
And not unwieldy is the wrong word, but I know what you mean. Tales from the Loop is a very simple version of it. Vaesen there's a bit more to it, but it's still the simple end of it. I'm possibly less keen on the more complicated Free League versions of it. Did you see that? I think sometimes whenever I play a more complicated version of Free League, I always think, why have you put extra things in? It works really well. Vaesen's got combat in it. It's got all sorts. You can do anything with it. It's really good.
Contests.
Why have you made it complicated? So, I know what you mean. And I suppose as well, Vaesen also has this thing that I like, that it's it is quite structured as a game, isn't it? As you said, you have this thing where it has phases of play, doesn't it? So you're invited. There's an invitation phase where the society gets a message at its castle to investigate something. Then you've got a preparation phase where you can prepare for the mystery. And then you've got a journey, haven't you, which is part of it, where you're invited to kind of improvise in the journey. Do you meet an old friend on the train or the boat, or what? You take a book to read. What's that book that you're reading on the journey? And I like that, because we've talked about this a lot in other podcasts. Journeys are always difficult in role-playing games. So it has this kind of structured thing before you get to the meat of the mystery.
It makes a feature of it. It doesn't make it a bug. It makes it that actually having a journey is part of
and it puts it on the players as well rather than you, because what you say is, right, you're on this train, it's going across Sweden to the other side of Sweden where the mystery is taking place. What are you each going to do on this journey? And you're allowed to kind of come up with something that you're doing, someone you meet, conversation you have with a stranger, anything like that. And that can have a mechanical impact later on, getting you extra dice and things like that. And that's great from a games master's point of view, because it takes the pressure of the journey off you, puts it on them.
Puts it on them, and it gives it a significance, doesn't it, that you can build up. And you're right, that structure, I think, is key to it. And I think it owes a certain debt to a previous speed rating game, Monster of the Week. That it does build mysteries in a similar building blocks to Monster of the Week. But it probably does it in a more less transparent. It's more tacit, isn't it? It's not like the cycles of something like Blades in the Dark.
No, it's not got that. No, it's still role playing. It just has these phases of where you still role playing within them.
And I think the other key bit that it has, and it also is apparent in Monster of the Week, is that countdown, that feeling that there is a momentum. That's why it works well in one-shots, isn't it? You're moving towards something, and it's going to get gradually more intense.
Yeah, if you don't do something, this is going to happen, then that's going to happen. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you're still dodging the...
I'm dodging the... Right, well, I'll tell you what, I think about this. I think the three rules that I particularly like about it are critical injuries.
Okay.
The campaign rules, if I'm allowed to. There's one key rule there, which is building your castle. Campaign rule, building your castle. And I think magic as well.
Yeah.
The magic system in it is quite entertaining.
Okay. So let's take those in turn then.
Okay.
First one, the critical rules.
Yeah, so it has critical injury. It has a critical injuries table. So it does the thing that a lot of free league games do, where you have conditions. You have 4 conditions, mental conditions, and 4 physical conditions. And when you take a 4th condition, you become broken. So you can either become physically broken or mentally broken. And then you have to roll on a critical injuries table. And that in itself is nothing unusual. But what's unusual about Vaesen is the top end of the critical tables, both mental and physical. So I think the top 5 or 6, you roll a D66, and I think the top 5 or 6, if you roll in the 60s, you take a serious life-threatening, a really serious. I mean, some of the lower ones will be life-threatening, but a proper nasty injury where you've got so many combat rounds to be healed, otherwise you're dead. Mental injuries, you've only got so many combat rounds until you're permanently insane. So, life and death kind of thing. Like a near-death experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
Either way, either mentally or physically, a near-death experience. And what's interesting about it is, and it doesn't happen enough in the game. It doesn't happen enough in the game. But I think it happened to your character. Did it happen to your character when we played? If you pull through, you have a kind of benefit, don't you? You get a sort of temporary, it might become permanent, but a temporary power, because you've been to the other side and come back, so you can see the future, or you can talk to the dead, and that kind of thing.
It gives you, I think my character got a sense of prophecy, didn't he? And
that's right, yeah, and it gives you this thing where you can then, during the rest of the adventure, use that once to see the future or talk to the dead or this kind of thing. And then when you get back to your castle, you make certain rolls, and there's a chance you might keep that ability. And I think that's really good. Because rather than just an unpleasant critical injury, you can actually get a benefit from it. You know, you've like with mental stuff, you've been to the brink of madness and come back from it. And within that, you've kind of got some kind of ability.
An insight into the world.
Yeah, you can become, I think things like you can become suddenly very charismatic because you're a changed person, because your mind's been broken, but you've come back in a different way. Yeah. And I really like that. I think it's a really interesting rule, that it's not just you've had a nasty injury, you will potentially get some benefit from it.
It's character building.
Character building. And from a role-playing perspective, it's interesting. It's not just, you've had a terrible injury and you walk with a limp, but you can now, talk to the dead or, see the other side or see the future and that kind of thing. Which is really a really good, a neat rule. I really like it, you know.
Yeah, that is really good. I do think that is one of its strengths, isn't it? That playing it over a sustained period. I know that you do a lot of one-shots from it, but there is value to doing a campaign because your character does build up and progress and become more interesting and deeper. Yeah. And it's not just arbitrary. It is actually built on your experiences, not only with the critical tables, but it might inform the way you choose your additional benefits and how your character fits. And
in a way that, I mean, we're going to talk next about the campaign rules, but it is almost like two games in one, in that if you run it as a one shot, the campaign rules don't really figure at all. But then if you run it as a little campaign, it has a different element, like a bolt-on element to it, doesn't it, that gives it a different, not a different flavour, but sort of more in-depth flavour to it that you don't quite get from a one-shot.
So let's talk about those campaign rules that you want to talk about into building up the castle, because it is a familiar thing from Free League games or Year Zero games. Yeah, it's a bit like the Mutant Year Zero. You have the arc, don't you, and you build it, but it's a similar idea that you have this castle, Gillenkrut's Castle, I think it's called, in Uppsala, and after each adventure you get experience points to spend on your character, but you also get some to spend on your castle. So as you progress, you can buy stuff for your castle. You can have it done up, basically. You can have a doctor's surgery put in, or a chapel, or an armoury, or you can buy it. You can employ people, can't you? Like a gardener, and all that kind of thing. And there's stages to it as well. So you have to have there's ladders, isn't there? So you have to buy early components. Yeah, you have to buy one thing before you can get another. So that's exactly it. And those things bring benefits, so that when you go on your next adventure, those things will help you. You know, so for example, if you buy the kind of doctor's stuff, the medical bit, when you get back, you do certain rolls to see if you can shake off permanent injuries, and it will help you do that because you've got that. Same with, I think, a chapel helps you with your sanity and things like that. And even things outside the castle, I think you can spend it to get a tavern. And it's not that you own the tavern, but it becomes your tavern, where you're the regulars, and that, again, benefits you with stuff. Because actually, I think alcohol, in it, the alcohol does help mental conditions, doesn't it? It's the most realistic aspect of the game. You know, it's actually, having a good old drink helps you get over. But also, that thing with the tavern, contacts and NPCs are important, aren't they? So they give you a set of archetype contacts that you may have.
So you can build up this castle. And when we played that little campaign with our Sunday group, people loved it. It made me laugh that we'd start the session and go, right, you've got some experience points from last time. Let's just sit back for 45 minutes while you decide whether to get a greenhouse with a garden, or whether to go and get a chapel, or what about an armoury? What about a guard dog? What about this? What about that?
I think part of the joy or pleasure from doing that was building in the preparation that we'd done at the castle or on the journey, and then calling on it when we were in the middle of the adventure, and realising how smart we were to have done that.
Of course, it's a pleasure, the pleasing thing of, oh look, are we clever with all this? It's useful. So those campaign rules are, I mean, that's the central thing with the campaign, building the castle. But
a bit of a diversion, because I know that you're a fanboy for this, but I'm going to say that one of the drawbacks is it's a beautiful book. It's a beautiful book to read, but in terms of a game book, that's where it falls short, I think. I find it hard to find stuff that you need in it, because there's all kinds of different call-out boxes, and so that moment when you're doing the shopping list, part of the difficulty is it'd be better in a table or something so I can get my head round it.
Yeah, because I suppose, like you say, I've got the building blocks thing where you need one thing before you get another.
Because you get overexcited, but
let's get one of these. But
hang on, oh no, I've got to have a lawn before I can have this.
Get what? Yeah.
And I think that follows through on some of the other things. So when you're looking at character things, you're kind of flicking through pages, and it is beautiful, but sometimes hard to find the stuff.
But at least it's beautiful when you're flicking through it.
Yeah,
at least there is that. But I'll take your point.
And I'm easily distracted by the illustrations. When I'm looking
it's too beautiful. I can't focus on the rules. It's too beautiful.
My eyes get drawn. Oh, that's good.
It's so beautiful that I've run it at various conventions. I never take it with me. I always take a tablet with a PDF on, because I can't let it leave the house. It's too beautiful. I didn't consider buying two. Well, I could take it with me and want to keep it home. That's how lovely it is as a rule book. The quality of the paper, everything.
That's a step too far.
Yeah, flicking through it now.
Okay, the third thing.
The third thing is a magic system in it, because it's a very light touch magic system. So the Vaesen have magical powers, which they can inflict on people, and it works as a kind of opposed roll. They have magic dice. They might have 8 magic dice, and they have to make an opposed roll with your observation skill or something like that. But I suppose what I like about it is the magic's quite... On the one hand, it has things called like curses, I think it is, where they're just a list of things that the Vaesen may have afflicted a locality with. There's no rolling dice. There's nothing like that. It's just stuff that it never stops raining, that kind of thing. All the milk from the cows is sour, that kind of thing, which is quite adds to the atmosphere without actually giving you a load of things to roll. You know, it doesn't say, well, if it rolls so much, then the milk's sour. It just is sour. And that sounds a bit daft, really. But sometimes in some games, they get bogged down in the mechanics of magic. I mean, really, you want magic to be magic, don't you?
Yeah.
You know,
we've said that before, haven't we? That, you know, by its very nature, magic breaks the game. So putting mechanics around it, very often.
So, and it has an attitude where it says magic that is applied to NPCs is the games master's choice. So, for example, there's one spell that, you know, you can afflict somebody with parts of an animal's body. So if you donkey's ears or something like that, the troll might curse you to have donkey's ears. And if it's an NPC, it just says, just do it.
Yeah.
It just happens. There's no rules for the NPC. The NPC it just happens.
Yeah.
You know, or not, up to the games master. And that is quite strangely liberating, where you think, because there's nothing worse, is there, than you know, trying to do something like that for atmosphere, and they make the saving throw. You know, it's not that kind of game. It gives you some advice about magic and says, you know, that it's all about the story. The players should never be subjected to things without having to make rolls. But the place where you are and the NPCs and all that kind of thing, they're just part of the story. And whilst they do have statistics for NPCs, you know, if you get into a fight with an NPC, they're going to roll dice. But in some senses, keep the NPCs out of the mechanics so that you can create that atmosphere. And it is quite good advice. And the magic system is quite light touch in the way it works. And also, the magic in it is a lot of fun. So I ran a one-shot a couple of years ago where there's one where they've cursed the food so that the villagers are eating slug and snail frog pies and horrible stuff, but they think it's delicious. And when the party gets there, some of them were lured into it and started to eat this stuff, and others could see it for what it was, you know. And it's kind of harmless in a way, but it's great for the atmosphere and the incident of the thing, you know. That these fairy folk are playing cruel pranks on the villagers and making them eat horrible stuff, under the illusion that it's delicious.
And it's in that perfect place that I really enjoy in terms of fantasy and the fantastic. And when we talked about Leoness before, and we've talked about Dragon Warriors, it is that world, isn't it? That world where those kind of things are possible. And I think you're right, putting mechanical elements around it remove something from them. So just being liberated by having a story. Just as a side point as well, the way that these Year Zero engine games, you have a light touch with NPCs, I really like as well, because you can quickly create mechanics for an NPC without trying too hard, can you? Just by choosing the dice pool that they've got and the level they are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it doesn't take. If you end up getting some conflict with the casual NPC, you can easily just come up with, and it gives you a little table of the kind of dice a average policeman would have when it comes to combat. You go, right, okay, that's what they've got. Simple as that.
Yeah, I think in general, I'm a fan of the system. It accommodates lots of different approaches, doesn't it? I think during the campaign, I was coaching horses through a group of cultists as a manoeuvre. And, how do we sort this out? And it kind of dealt with it, didn't it, in a way?
Yeah, it just dealt with it in that you just made a roll, and for every 6 you got, I said you knocked one of the cultists over. Yeah. And that dead easy. Dead dramatic, kind of dramatic and quite exciting the way it works, because it is so simple,
Yeah. And in terms of, we have to look at a duff one. Can you bring yourself to?
I can't. I don't think there's a duff rule. I think it's brilliant. I can't think of one. I'm trying to think of it. You put this test to me to think of a duff rule. Can I think of a duff rule?
I don't think there's. I don't think there's.
Maybe the rule book, like you say, it is a beautiful rule book, but occasionally you can get a little bit lost in it. I'd say, yeah.
I think the archetypes are very strong, and I think it'd be good to have some more members of the society, because I think I played a groundsman who was quite lascivious, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's right. Hunter turned groundsman, hadn't he? Poacher turned gamekeeper.
And I based him on, like Lady Chatterley's lover.
Mellors.
Mellors.
The womanizer, wasn't it?
He was, yeah. Walks into any bar and all of,
But it's hard to think of can you think of a duff rule?
No,
bit of it?
I think it is an example of a game which is perfectly formed to do exactly what it does.
Yeah, I think you're right. That is it, isn't it? That if you tried to move it into a different setting or a different context, you might find it doesn't quite work. But there's a perfect kind of connect. Yeah, it just works perfectly with that Victorian Gothic setting and the right level of mechanics to create that world.
Yeah,
two things sit perfectly side by side, I think.
We should say as well that recent supplements have created it for Britain and Ireland.
Yeah, there's a Mythic Britain, isn't there? Mythic Britain, yeah. Which is good as well. That's good as well, by Graham Davis, isn't it?
Yeah. Who's been on?
He's been on. Friend of the podcast. You have to say that.
Yeah.
Friend of the podcast.
But and that's attractive again, isn't it? Because again, coming back to, I keep saying, that is the kind of world, fantastic world that I like to inhabit in role-playing games, and that's the kind of stuff that I like.
And it's good. It's good as well, because the Mythic Britain thing demonstrates it, and the Vaesen rulebook demonstrates it, that it's not. Some of the advice it gives you, it doesn't expect you to necessarily stick to what's in the rulebook in terms of the monsters. The monsters are quite fluid in as much as myth and legend. There might be 3 or 4 names for these monsters in different parts of the country, and in different parts of the country, they might have slightly different mythologies attached to them in terms of what they do and don't do and whether they're good or bad. They've got that kind of thing in it. And it also gives some great advice. One of my favourite pieces of advice on the Victorian setting, where it basically says, don't worry about the history. If you want a typewriter in, you can have a typewriter in, even if typewriters haven't really been invented until about 18 whatever. If you want a typewriter, just put a typewriter in, don't worry about it. Which is great advice, because it doesn't actually affect the general sense of it, but it's vaguely Victorian.
Yeah, it's like a fictionalised version of the world.
Yeah, and it does talk about that. It says it is a fictionalised Victorian setting. It's your Victorian setting, so don't worry too much about.
The advice is really strong as well, isn't it? Just to pick up that point, the advice to games masters and players is really strong, and that idea of creating a sensory experience for players, really focusing in on all those elements, and not to forget that that is part of the atmosphere building. Yeah. When we're talking about monsters, we need to have a monster off before we finish.
Oh, a monster off. Go on. Have you prepared for this? Just to beat me. A Vaesen monster off.
I am prepared, but I think if there's any game... Now, but bear in mind, I've only been a player in this.
Yeah.
If there's any game that upholds our idea of having a prime directive, which means that only one person in the... in your group should own a copy of it.
Yeah.
Because the whole essence of it depends upon games masters knowing the secrets.
I suppose maybe you've hit on... Maybe this is perhaps unfair, but maybe you've hit on the duff thing. That it isn't a game you can all really own.
No.
Because you're right, it does hinge on what's going on here and how do we sort it. And if you've all read the rules, well, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So maybe that is the slight problem with it.
I remember you looking in horror at people on Twitter showing that they'd all got the adventure supplement.
Everyone's got Mythic Britain. Everyone's got it. You're just like, right, well, there's no point playing it then, is there? Everyone's got the adventures. Everyone, the Kickstart, everyone backed it. So everyone's got it. All right, well, forget it then.
Yeah.
See, playing it.
You're not going to be turning up in your neighbourhood running it, because chances are people have... But let's face it, people have got it, but it's on the bookshelf, isn't it? They're not really...
People don't. And I played, and I'll be running in a few weeks, the Winter's Tale from the Seasons of Mystery. And I played it at Grogmeet, and I'd had it, but I hadn't read it.
Yeah.
I did have it. I hadn't read
Everybody
it.
just sort of said the illustration. Ooh.
Yeah, it's around that. I must read that. But yeah, you're right. And I've not read the other Seasons of Mystery ones either. I only know one in case the others come up. So I played it and then I can run it.
So I've limited myself to a monster that I've encountered.
Go on.
And that is the lindworm.
The lindworm. The acid-spitting lindworm.
The great reptilian, dragon-like beast. That... What I like about it is, like a lot of these, is it has its own kind of quirks and things about it. And there are different, as you said, different flavours of the lindworm depending on region. Some of them may be benign lindworms. They might, give favours to the local population.
Yeah, exactly.
And the local population do not want to go because of the powers that it gives them.
Yeah.
But also the fact that if you consume the lindworm, gives you some of the powers.
Yeah. If you eat one, if you kill one and cook the meat of the lindworm,
So it's entirely possible to meet a population of people who've all eaten.
You've all eaten some lindworm. They killed one and all carved it up at a big feast. Yeah,
and they're spitting acid.
Yeah,
turning invisible.
Yeah,
and causing havoc.
There's an idea there, isn't there?
There is
an idea,
and that is precisely what's good about it, isn't it? That
all
of these monster descriptions, they have great.
And it will give you a few scenario hooks with each monster, but it's very, very easy to come up with others based on what each monster describes. The monster I would pick, my favourite monster, this is perhaps a bit odd, is the troll.
Right.
The troll, because I like the fact that whilst it does talk about trolls in the mountains looking like traditional trolls, kind of monstrous trolls, it also talks about trolls that live amongst people. So the trolls in Vaesen are, and in Scandinavian myth, look human. Because I think you encountered some in the first adventure where sometimes there's a giveaway. So you might see that they've, I think in one of the taverns there was a woman who owned the tavern who was a troll, and you saw a tail poking out from under her long dress, or they might have stubby little horns that they've hidden with their hair, that kind of thing. And they could do magic and all that kind of stuff. But I like the fact that it's very, very subtle that, you could be talking to a monster who owns a shop somewhere in a village, but they're actually a troll. Yeah. Who have magical powers. I quite like that. It's opposite, I suppose, of the Lindworm. The Lindworm is at one extreme, isn't it? And it's a monstrous dragon-type monster. Can't really ignore it. And yet, I like the troll that's good because it's very, very subtle. You're looking for a monster, but it's a very subtle monster. It doesn't necessarily look like a monster. And it lives in harmony with people. It might be people that have upset the monster. The troll's been upset by people.
The trolls could be in league with the Lindworm.
Yes. Could be a village full of trolls who've eaten a Lindworm. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Let's. You can have that one. I'll call it a score draw. So that's Vaesen. Speed rated, and we're very positive about it.
We're very positive. It is a very, very good game. It's one of my favourite. Definitely my top 5. You do your top 5. It's definitely in there because it is a fantastic, perfectly formed game, I would say.
And what strikes me about it is that it's not one of those, because we both do this. We have sudden enthusiasms for a game. It came out in 2020. You got it during lockdown.
Yeah.
You played a lot of it.
Yeah.
And your enthusiasm for it isn't diminished. You're still.
No, that's true. That is a test, isn't it, of a good game, that my enthusiasm hasn't diminished. I would run it again. I'm running it in a couple of weeks and looking forward to running it.
Yeah.
Because it is a lot of fun.
Yeah. There we go. Thanks a lot for that.
Okay. Goodbye.
The Save for Half podcast covers old school gaming and the modern games inspired by them. Listen in to hear about games from the 70s and 80s as well as their modern descendants. You can download episodes wherever podcasts are found on iTunes, Google, and other fine podcast distributors. You should also check them out on saveforhalf.com or email them at saveforhalfpodcast@gmail.com.
I'll get me coat. Okay, we're heading towards the storeroom door. We're putting our furry jackets on, ready to go out into the wilds of Bolton and face whatever monsters are out there, members of the society. But as we're doing that, we're just carrying on the chat, aren't we? So this is our closing time chatter. Blythe, what's occupying your thoughts at the moment?
Well, Christmas gifts. It's post-Christmas podcast.
Has he been? Did he come?
He did. Well, he didn't really. I got some money and spent it on gaming. It's not quite the same, is it? You can't trust family with role playing, can you? You can't say to them, "Oh, I'd like this or that." They're just going to look at you like you're mad.
I faced the wrath of my family this year. They were they're full of scorn at the fact that I bought myself quite a few presents. They thought that it was bad
form or something.
Bad form. I think I tipped it too far. Sometimes you kind of think, well, yeah, I'll get myself this. Yeah, wrap this up for me. You can give me that.
Yeah.
They started to kind of see through it and get a bit.
You've gone mad. Like, you've got more presents than anybody.
Exactly. Yeah.
You've got more presents than anybody. And they're all presents you want because you bought them. Whereas we've got less presents. Some of them are things we don't want.
Yeah, fewer presents.
Fewer, sorry. Yeah, fewer. You pedant. Yeah, I know what you mean. Because you can't trust. You see, I found over the years, people would say, "Oh, what do you want for Christmas?" And if you say something gaming based, they'd look like,
yeah.
What? It's not worth bothering, is it? No. But anyway, I've got some Christmas money, and I bought myself something I have had my eye on for a bit. I bought it from the Excellent Leisure Games. Can you do that? Are we allowed to do it?
Yeah,
we're allowed to mention.
Paying us, are they?
No, they're not paying us. There you go. I always like to think Fabio works there, packed it for me, but apparently doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Doesn't do that aspect. If he did, I'd order loads of Powered by the Apocalypse just to annoy him. But anyway, I bought the boxed set of the Dungeon Crawl Classics Lankmar.
Oh,
I bought that, and it's very, very good. It's very good, but it raises an issue. It raises a bit of an issue.
Right, what's the issue?
Well, it's great. It's a box set, Lankmar. It's got some rule tweaks for Dungeon Crawl Classics. It's got big map. It's got background stuff in. It was a very nostalgic experience. I know DCC does play on the nostalgia thing, doesn't it? But it's a very nostalgic experience because it's a long time since I got something like that with a map in and a city. It felt like buying Thieves World for the first time.
Yeah.
It felt like back in the 80s getting Thieves World. There was a certain beauty to it, you know, where you think, wow, look, there's a huge map of a city and there's all these different streets and all this stuff in it, you know. And what you realise reading it, and this sounds stupid because it's not something people forget, really. But in a strange way, you can forget it. How influential Fritz Lieber's concepts and writing out to role-playing.
Yeah.
So people often talk about Moorcock, or talk about Tolkien, of course, that kind of thing. But Fritz Lieber, we read about Lankmar, and it's so influential on the way role-playing games operate. Thieves' guilds, a fighter and a thief. The idea that they work for sorcerers, you know, they are patrons, they go on jobs, all those kind of things. You read it and think, God, it's such an influential
and
thing.
it was so close to it, wasn't he, as well? In the gaming convention in the 70s, he was there and friends with Ken St. Andre.
Yeah. Very, very influential. It brings it, I suppose it's not that you've forgotten that, but when I got it, it reminded me of it, I suppose. But I suppose one of the issue it raises is it's only really brilliant if you ran it as a little campaign.
Right.
When it comes to like a one-shot, I think it'd be a lot of fun, but it will be missing something because the whole city thing is a campaign.
Yeah.
You know, so it has like tables and stuff in to create a district. So it has tables for street names and in businesses and who lives here and who lives there. And you roll it on the table and it says create a little area for yourself within Lankmar, that kind of thing. You think it's great, you know, it's really good. But when?
Yeah.
So, you know, I might run some DCC Lankmar for Virtual Grog Meet, but it will be a one-shot and it probably won't give you the absolute flavour of it, if you know what I mean. You know, when I read it, I thought, this is fantastic. And then I immediately thought, when am I going to fit this in?
Yeah.
You know.
If only we could conquer time and space. Then this is. Do I need to stage an intervention again? Because this is your enthusiasm for DCC.
Yeah, you don't like it, do you? You're suspicious of it.
No, it's not.
You seem looking at me like...
You're kind of building me up and you kind of trying to bring me on board. You're onboarding me.
Well, no, I'm not onboarding you. I don't care. I want the prime directive.
One word I'm going to say to you.
Go on.
Numenera. Is it a Numenera or is it a Vaesen? This DCC obsession that you get.
Well, time will tell. Time will tell. When we do review of the year at the end of the year, we'll see, won't we?
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll find out. You can't tell. You can never tell, can you?
No.
Gaming works like that. You do it as well. Don't make out it's just me. You do it as well. Everyone does it. You get a new game and you love it and you love it. And will you carry on loving it? Or will it ultimately be one that you go, yeah, I've run a bit of that, but I'm not sure.
I'd go back to it.
I'm going to go back to it. Or you might go back to it, but you don't have the urge to go back to it.
It's a time element again, isn't it? I managed to resist. I rolled my saving rolls throughout 2022.
Yeah.
The urge was strong to buy Blade Runner and do the Kickstarter. Right? But I managed to do it. I managed to resist it.
I was the same. I resisted. Yeah.
I resisted. As you know, I'm a massive Blade Runner fan. I love the film. I still have the box, the VHS box that I bought at significant expense when I could. I've got it. I still love it. I still watch that first movie. I love it. But I resisted because I just thought, don't fall into the trap of another Free League. I think it's a Twilight 2000. I think I actually talked about this, and it's saying, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to resist it. And I did. Until...
Twilight 2000, which a lot of people bought. I haven't seen it run at a convention yet.
No.
Funny that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Strange thing. Anyway, go on.
Yeah. And I worried that it would be the same thing, and that feeling of beyond what you could do within Blade Runner, what else could it offer?
Yeah. It's the limitations of it. I think it's like we've said about Alien. I think Alien's a great game. The Free League Alien game's great, but they do feel there's slight limitations on what you could do with it, but also what people would expect from it. I mean, this is the thing with Blade Runner, isn't it?
Yeah.
You might be able to do other things with it, but people would expect to be hunting replicants.
Yeah, if you're not chasing Roy Batty in his underpants around the top of the department.
Exactly.
Well, as soon as the bong of the end of the year went, my resolve broke, and over on the Discord channel, we have like a bring and buy channel.
Yeah.
And one of the Grog Squad was offloading the Blade Runner stuff. Well, I'm broke and I bought it. And I thought initially...
You did what? You muttered that then. What did you do?
I bought it.
You bought it?
Yeah. First of all, I thought, right, I'll get the rulebook. And so I'll go on, I'll have the rulebook. But the dice were there, so you need the dice.
Get the dice.
And what do you always say?
Games Master Screen.
You got to get
always get the Games Master Screen. Always get that.
I got that. I asked for that. Go on, I'll get it and see what it's like. And he gave me the price, and it included the starter set. I didn't want the starter set, but by that point I thought, well, I might as well get the starter set. So I've ended up with a whole kit and caboodle of Blade Runner.
So we're resisting last year, suddenly. On the stroke of 12, you got everything.
Got everything.
No point resisting them, what's the real?
No, it wasn't. So you've got that to look forward to, or have you?
That's like giving up smoking, and then on the stroke of New Year, after a year of not smoking, opening a packet of fags to celebrate.
Yeah. Not only opening packets, like smoking them all at once.
All at once. But 20 Benson and Edges and going for them, chain smoking them all at once, one after the other. What are you doing that for? I'm celebrating, giving up. I didn't buy this game, I did really well. What if you done? I bought it. I look forward to playing it though.
Yeah. Sign of things to come, 2023. My resistance is useless.
It is useless, yeah. You might as well just succumb to it.
See you later.
See ya.
There isn't another bit. As I record this, King Charles and the Queen Consort Camilla are visiting Bolton Town Hall to celebrate its 150-year anniversary. I like to think that they're supping on summer fruit cordial, taken from the storeroom where it's been for 150 years, so they can wash down their pasty on a barm cake. God bless 'em. Thank you to Jim for being the guest on the podcast. I really enjoyed revisiting Moviedrome. I hope that you did too. I recorded this discussion prior to Jim having significant surgery to treat cancer. All of us here at the Grognard Files wish him the very best as he convalesces. Get well soon, Mr. Moon. I've started a Substack following the lead of Superspad Dominic Cummings. Substack is a new form of blogging which combines eMither and the usual blog functions. I'm going to use it for my thoughts on subjects that are only tangentially related to the subject of gaming. The first one included some recommendations of books that are not RPG supplements, but look like RPG supplements. I'll put a link in the notes. It's a bit less like Dominic Cummings and more like Meaningless Gubbins. A new year and a new commitment to return to the outstanding zine project that's been ticking over ever since the novel virus period. In reality, due to all the other things that are going on, it's unlikely that the project will be revived until summer. I'll keep you informed and involved as things progress. The best way of keeping up with the various Grognard Files developments is to sign up to our Discord server. I know that people find it difficult sometimes to navigate around the various channels, and it's hard to follow some of the various chains of discussion on Discord, but it's worth persevering because I find it a great source of ideas, recommendations, and a friendly community atmosphere. It's hard to jump on a train when it's moving, but if you'd like to give it a try, drop me a line and I'll send you a link and help you on board. Listeners, members of the Grog Squad, support this podcast and the various projects that we do by throwing a tip in the beret. It seems even more special now, given all the pressures that we're feeling and the increased cost of living. Thank you to everyone who's ever supported us. It's really appreciated. We have had some new patrons join us since October, so here's a shout out and thanks for making this work. Joining the armchair adventurers with a comfy armchair and a fancy poof is Andrew Frank, Howard Fernhead, Robert Compton, Guy Phillips and Tom Martins. Welcome and thank you. At the sofa so good level, I like to give a virtual gift from a table from a game under discussion. I'll roll a dice, apparently at random, and pick from the upgrade facilities of the Vaesen castle base. Okay, so first is James Knight, and he gets a pigeon loft. Michael Kerwin, a seance parlour. Ryan Skeets, a difference engine. Andrew Mullington, a forgotten gallery. Geoffrey Hinckley, self-flagellation tools. Dan Alexander, an occult library. Dave Dow, the annals of the society. Shane Whelan, a carp pond. Lucas Alvin, a treasure chamber. Jonathan Turner, a gymnasium. Bill Mize, a dungeon. And last but not least, Don Parry gets a weapons corridor. Thanks everyone, and thank you for listening. If you like what we do, please pass it on. And this year, why not email people that you haven't played with in a while? You never know what might happen. Until next time, when we get bad with a double D, adios, amigos.